Hello again. This is John and Noah. We are with UrbanDigs, and welcome back to Know Your Sector. Today we've got Hal Coopersmith from Coopersmith Coopersmith, an attorney who's going to walk us through what's happening in the rental sector. And Hal, just before I begin with you, I just like to kind of run over with Noah kind of what's happening in the rental market. Noah, it seems like listings for rent are up. Lease signings are slightly up, but it seems like we have a lot more things out there for lease than are being taken advantage of. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it seems to be following the same pattern of sales, right? I mean, when you break it down to new inventory coming on, new deals going into contract and listing coming off, it's kind of following the same trends. You're seeing the activity in the new listings come on, and you're starting to see a slight normalization of the lease activity, if not rebound from the bottoms of lease activity, but it's slight.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting because so the new active new active for rents are basically at their levels as they were sort of last year. So it's sort of a
right.
season. We're back at seasonal levels, but we're still waiting for that reopening to kind of really kick up the lease signs back to where they
Yeah,
are.
and price discovery, all that's going to start once we get reopened. We need 2-3 weeks to kind of adjust and figure out where we're at.
Yeah. So in preparation for that market reopening, let's turn it over to Hal here. So Hal, why don't you just give a quick rundown about what are the new rent laws that are in effect?
Thanks, John, and Noah. Great to be here. So a lot of people may know that there were sweeping rent reforms enacted by New York State last summer, and that affects rentals across all of New York State, but specifically Manhattan and Brooklyn markets that you guys talk about a lot, where there's a lot of individual owners, people that may not be familiar with the rental laws, and brokers who kind of are the trusted advisor for those properties. Figured it'd be a great opportunity to talk about how that impacts their businesses. A lot of brokers may have heard about being able to collect commissions first and foremost. Right now, that's on hold. That's a very important aspect of the new law, and that trial date is set for September. So right now, in terms of commissions, everything is still the way that it is. But a lot of new laws went into effect that affect rentals, that affect late fees, collecting security deposit, and what can be charged by an owner in terms of an application fee. And in addition, for landlords, there's a lot more compliance, which I'm very passionate about talking about.
Yeah, let's start with let's start on the broker side about this. What are some of the things the brokers have to know about the new laws just from the get-go?
First off, can't charge more than $20 on a credit check. For co-ops and condos, there are a lot more fees that are involved. A broker, there is a safe harbor for a broker in terms of collecting those fees. I've gotten that question. So if you're collecting fees on behalf of a co-op and condo, a broker's in the clear. Like I talked about in terms of a commission, a broker can still collect commission from the tenant. And importantly, there's no more collecting more than 1 month security deposit and more than 1 month's rent in advance. So you can no longer collect the first and last month's rent.
Right. I think that's been around for a while. I think the market's still trying to reconcile that with their established business models, but hopefully we'll find a balance there. Let's shift to tenants. What are some of the things that if you're an agent out there and you've got a rental client, what you kind of have to educate your potential tenants on?
The law and certainly made it more tenant friendly. And in terms of remaining in an apartment, we can talk about the landlord side, but they can't have an increase of more than 5% on their rent without the landlord advising them in advance. And that's a very important protection for the tenants. Also, the tenants is required to get their security deposit back within 2 weeks of the end of the term, or the landlord has to provide a detailed notice in terms of all the deductions that were taken from the security deposit. And that's an important addition, particularly for leases as they're expiring and tenants who are looking to get back their security deposit.
Great. And lastly, I guess is on the landlord side. So if you're an agent that's representing a landlord, is there anything new that you have to worry about ahead of the market reopening here and just in general?
That is a loaded question because there is a lot for a landlord to be aware of. First of all, if you're signing a new lease, like I said, it's 1 month's security, 1 month's rent, no more. Otherwise, you can get in hot water. Obviously, the market's adjusting, no more pet fees, That's off the bat. There are additionally 4 requirements for any new lease. First, you have to offer a tenant a walkthrough before the lease starts. Like I alluded to earlier, if you're going to raise the rent by more than 5% or let the lease expire, you have to send a notice either 30, 60, or 90 days, depending on how long the tenant has been in the premises. So that's 30 days for a short-term lease. We'll call that less than a year, 60 days for a year to up to 2 years, and 90 days if the tenant's been in the premises for more than 2 years. And that's extremely important because you need to be on top of your tenant. The landlord needs to be on top of complying with the law and what's happening with their tenant. Particularly, say this time next year, they're taking a discount in rent and they want to raise it by more than 5%. They have to be on top of that notice. Additionally, a landlord has to offer a tenant a walkthrough within a 1-week window before the term expires, even though a lot of the damage happens when a tenant moves out. And then finally, like I said, returning the security deposit within 2 weeks from the end of the term. So there's a lot for a landlord to be on track of as a result of the new law.
Yeah, I mean, this makes it so that the agent really needs to be on top of their game. Hal, what happens if a landlord does not comply with those laws?
Well, it depends exactly in terms of what aspect they're not complying with. So, for example, if they don't send that non-renewal notice, the tenant can stay in the premises on the same terms and conditions until that notice is sent. So that could really goof up the next rental, or if it's a co-op condo or a townhouse, the sale of the property could really delay the closing. And rest assured, we'll be talking a lot about that around this time next year, or as more information comes to market. Like I said earlier, if you want to raise the rent by more than 5%, you're literally leaving money on the table if you don't send out this notice. And there's a cap in terms of how much you can increase the rent without sending out that notice. And then, like I said about the walkthroughs and sending the notice for security deposit deductions, could mean that the landlord pays for the damages caused by the tenant out of their own pocket rather than the security deposit.
Yeah, it's interesting, and especially now. I mean, it seems like this is just a minefield to begin with. So let me just look at the walkthrough of the tenant at the end. Is there anything special about what's happening with walkthroughs now in this age of Corona? And the other question I have as sort of a follow-up to that is, are there any new sort of COVID clauses that you've seen in leases? I'm just curious how people are dealing with this situation.
Yeah, it's a really good question, John, just because there's a limit to what can be done in terms of contact. And just to take a step back, the intent behind the law is generally so that the landlord doesn't take money from the security deposit artificially, just because, they didn't let the tenant know. And then sometimes there could be unauthorized deductions. So the state wanted to stop that from happening. So just in terms of what that means is you have to offer a tenant a walkthrough just to show what damages there are. As a result of COVID, you kind of have to do the best job possible. I've seen situations where someone is immunocompromised either from landlord or tenant side, can't necessarily do a walkthrough. You want to do a video, want to document the situation the best that you can. And depending on what side you are, whether or not you're the tenant or the landlord, and make sure that you deliver the property in the right place, in the right condition. And if you are the landlord side, kind of figure out what damage might be caused to the best extent that you can.
Hey, Hal, I got a quick question for you. Let's say I'm an owner, not necessarily a landlord. I'm an owner. I own a unit, right? I'm renting it out. They're under lease. My leasee left, went to the Hamptons, went to a family and whatever, and they are causing trouble for me. And they want to, I don't know, they're not using the place. They want to pay a fraction of what the rental, rate was. I'm the owner. Do I have any chance? Do I got to make a deal with these guys? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, it's certainly a very difficult situation for individuals, for large companies, and people across the board. So, Noah, you've gone to the Hamptons. Congratulations. That's great. If I were your owner, I would say, look, you're in the Hamptons, you can pay your rent, hopefully.
Right.
You know, there's an eviction moratorium going on, but at the end of this term, at the end of the moratorium, I'm going to try to collect that. You know, that's, you know, for a tenant who's able to pay. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who aren't able to pay. And there's, you know, as a result of the eviction moratorium, there's obviously a natural renegotiation of leases given the circumstances, because at a certain point, owners need to get rent, and tenants signed a contract to pay the rent.
Right.
Interesting. And lastly, Hal, as I wrap this up, I know that you guys are very strong in the compliance section. I know you guys have software to kind of handle that, and we're going to put a link to that in the description. But if you could just, you know, bang out a few of the top items that brokers need to be really paying attention on the compliance side, that'd be great.
Yeah. So like I said, really, there's a lot more deadlines in terms of complying with the new law. And what I realized from my own practice is that for the individual owners, there's, you know, it'd be hard enough to get a renewal in on time, or just owners weren't thinking about that. And brokers who were acting as the eyes on the ground, the trusted advisor, you know, didn't have a way of communicating to me as the attorney, or necessarily the owner, in terms of figuring out everything that was going on. So we developed a software called RezCue, Rez for residential, Q for queues, email and text alerts that save, rescue both the owner and the broker from non-compliance of the lease. And what it does is it sends these alerts about all the upcoming obligations. So it reminds the owner and the broker in terms of, look, you have to send out this either non-renewal notice or rent increase notice, which is important, particularly if you're taking a discount in rent at this time, or you want to sell the property and make sure it's free and clear at the closing. So that's the first alert. Like I said, in terms of the walkthrough before the expiration of the term, sends another series of alerts there, and also reminds the owner about the returning of the security deposit. And I know that you have a lot of brokers as part of your audience. I think a lot of brokers can probably relate that they're usually the ones doing the walkthroughs, coordinating a lot of things. And this is something that's specifically tailored for those small and individual owners that have brokers as their eyes and trusted advisor on the ground.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We're running out of time. That is your rental market rundown as we head into the reopening, hopefully scheduled for late June, early July. Hal Coopersmith of Coopersmith and Coopersmith, thank you for joining us on Know Your Sectors.
Thank you, Hal.
John and Noah, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
John.